I'm really excited. It's been a great day. I hope everyone had a good one too. So real quick, what am I going to talk about today? Don't read that. Here's a picture of me with hair. Oh. My kids had head lice, so I didn't. My wife wouldn't let me come home unless I shaved my head, so I just went ahead and did that. But sometimes you just got to take one for the team. Anyway, no. So what am I here to talk about? So I'm a big company guy who came into the startup world, after 10 years or so in big companies. So I worked in defense. I was in video games for a while. I worked at Qualcomm for 8 years. So I came in as I've been a project manager, a product manager, a developer, DevOps, et cetera. But always kind of had this sort of big company mindset of execution, coming into the startup world and basically just getting slapped upside the head with none of that stuff matters. Just build a product, get it out the door. We need to survive. We need to make money. We need to get users. And that was fine for a while, but then ultimately you realize it's not sustainable. And when the company starts to grow, you realize that you actually need to figure out a way to create some kind of feedback loop or process in order to make sure that you're building the right things, working on the right things, building the right product. So jumping right into it, the focus that I have on developing products is starting and ending with the user, so user-centric design, but generally creating feedback loops so that you are listening to your customers, listening to your stakeholders, listening to all the voices that are telling you what you should build. And then the process, and what I'm going to talk about, is how do you create a process to figure out which one of those things is the right thing, right? How do you listen to your own intuition? How do you listen to, your C-level, your executives, your investors, your customers, and make the right decision, and then have the feedback loop to determine whether or not you were right? Let the data show whether or not the feature that you added had the impact that you actually anticipated, and let that feed into your process of being able to prioritize going forward. So you should always listen to your users. Start by listening to your user, right? You interview your users and you figure out what their pains are. You take that pain and you come up with ideas. You say, well, I think I could solve that problem for you doing X, Y, and Z. Then as quickly as possible, you need to figure out, how do I validate that my idea would actually solve that problem? So coming up with some experiments, thankfully, or hopefully you could do it without any kind of software. But some way of coming up with an experiment to test your idea before you invest a lot into it. If you can validate that with your users, say, well, okay, if I did something that did this conceptually, or here's a wireframe, do you think this would solve your problem? Or a prototype, whatever that is. But you're constantly going through that loop of validating, is this going to solve your problem? Is this going to solve your problem, as you create something that's more and more fleshed out and complete. You implement it, you analyze the results using data in addition to customer feedback, but actually monitoring the behavior of your users, monitoring the metrics. Are they actually doing the thing that you wanted them to do, engaging with your product, and then starting the process over again. So there's going to be a lot of people telling you what to do. And the focus of this first section is essentially, how do you get the list of all the things that you think you should do so that you can prioritize it, right? So does anyone know what HIPPOs are? Right? Highly paid people's opinions, right? So you've got your CEOs, you've got your investors, you got people who, think they're whatever doesn't stink, and that, you should build what they want you to build. And that is an important voice. Obviously they got there for a reason, but as some of the other folks have talked about, there's bias in that. Sometimes you get blinders on. Sometimes your own self-confidence gets you into a position where you have blind spots. So that's something that needs to be listened to, but managed, and making sure that it's balanced with the other voices. My opinion being the voice of the customer is the most important. So you have internal voices as well. So you have your engineers, you have your marketing and sales team, you have other people that are at your company or their stakeholders, that partners that their opinion matters as well. And you need to figure out a way to listen to them, to get their ideas. But again, all these ideas are going to come to you. What should we build? What feature should we add? How should we change this, tweak this design or what have you? and you ultimately get this very long list of things you could do, but how do you prioritize them? Now, how do you capture the voice of the customer? So this is something, if you're, I'm in a direct-to-consumer space, getting customer feedback is incredibly important, but it's also pretty difficult. It's hard to reach out through people's phones and say, hey, why did you do that thing you just did in my app? Or, or do you like this? Or hey, you were using my app for 2 weeks and then all of a sudden you never came back again. Why? It's hard to get this feedback, but it's critical. So this is where I focus a lot of my time. So you can ask them, and you can use tools like Mixpanel or there's several sort of marketing automation tools, and have essentially drip campaigns where you're asking people for their feedback. So okay, maybe it's day one. Why? What brought you here? Maybe week one. How do you like things so far? You can trip things. So if they're really active in your platform, but then they don't use your platform for a while, you can trigger a dormant survey, right? So again, we use Mixpanel, but you can say, okay, if somebody hasn't logged in, or maybe they're a premium user, but they haven't logged in or they haven't used the app in 2 weeks, send them a survey. Hey, what happened? Where'd you go? A couple quick buttons, and that can give you a lot of feedback. There's in-app feed, there's SDKs and so on you can integrate in your website or in your app as well, even just to get in-app feedback right then and there. And then obviously interviews, right? So if you have an opportunity to reach out to people, hopefully you have their email address, you can give them some kind of incentive. Okay, here, win a gift card or win an Echo if you take this survey, right? Give us some feedback on this new feature that we've implemented. You can observe them. I'm really big on sort of larger data sets, and I think spying on people is a great way of understanding them. And so we're always trying to see, well, how are people actually using this app in the real world? So we use usertesting.com. Does everybody use that? Has everyone tried it? Very few people. Wow, it's a great service. So it's something like Mechanical Turk or others are kind of similar, but basically you're paying people who sit around all day and test apps. So there's a little bit of bias there, but you can essentially pay people to use, to go through a script and use your product or service or use your app. It's obviously software. And you can obviously observe how they use things in real time, but then you can also ask them questions and so on. So we always do at least a handful of these with every major release. Focus groups, obviously a great way, or not even a focus group, the coffee shop test, right? Hey, check this out. What do you think of this? Or can you sit down and use this website and let me just kind of observe you and see where they get tripped up. But then also now you can record people as they're using your app. So has anyone heard of an SDK called AppC? Nobody. You've heard of it, yeah. So they were acquired by Fabric, who does Crashlytics, who's since been bought by Google or Twitter? I don't know. Anyway, so now they're big, yeah, Google. So AppC is an SDK that you can plug into your mobile app, which actually records real-time video of them using your app. So when your app fires up, it just starts recording the screen and all of their button presses and everything like that. And then when they finish their session, it uploads the video to the server that you can monitor. And then you can also trigger actions on your button presses or your screen views or your swipes or whatever to trigger events, and then you can do funnels and things like that. And then if you use Crashlytics, which we do, if there's a crash, it can actually tie back to a video. And so when we have a big crash that pops up, we can just go in there and start saying, well, what were people doing right before it crashed? Oh, wow, look, they did this and then they did that and we weren't expecting that. Oh, okay, cool. So now we can debug. But honestly, I like just browsing through there every once in a while and just kind of spying on people and see how they're using it and seeing if there's ways, okay, we launched a new feature. Well, let's just see all the new users, everyone who registered, after this date. What are they doing? How are they using the app? So it's a great way to kind of see what people are doing. And then analyze them. So this is something I'm going to tie into a lot sort of later in the talk, but built-in analytics, built-in event tracking, built-in properties and sort of derived metrics around your users so that you can track performance when you make new releases, doing A/B testing or so on. So cohorts is something that we really focus a lot on. Essentially, it's a really simple thing. We have a reference table of cohorts, sort of A/B type of experiences, and anytime a new user gets created, they get added to 1 or 2 cohorts, and sometimes we randomize it, what it may be. And then we actually tie conditional logic in the UI to say anyone who registers who gets added to this cohort, they get this experience, or they get that experience, or this feature is turned on or off, or what have you. And then that's attribution. So then for the lifetime of that user, we know, oh, okay, this is a user who came in with this onboarding experience, or who came in after we introduced this new premium feature, or what have you. And then we can just run analytics to say, well, what impact did that have? What impact did that feature have on conversion, retention, whatever those metrics are? So this is kind of the key that I'll tie into later on, is when you create that feedback loop, is attributing this particular feature that we prioritized, that we implemented, what impact did it have, right? And so then when you're making a hypothesis that I think that this feature is going to have this impact on retention, that you can actually measure it and you can actually prove it with data. And then in addition, we do a lot of events. So we do so every button that gets pressed, every screen that gets viewed, every major interaction, purchases, registrations, and so on, we just fire off events in a big event log. And there's a lot of different tools that kind of capture this stuff. But we just spend a lot of time analyzing our users' behavior and trying to understand why they do the things that they do, which, again, when you can't go and just ask them very easily is something, really critical for us. Or even if they tell you why they did something, that isn't actually necessarily the case, right? We try to be driven by the data. And the great thing about all this, about capturing user feedback, is, going back to this, it gives weight against the hippos, right? So, if your CEO tells you, I think we should do this because I say so, you can say, well, actually, we've looked at all the user data, or we've surveyed the users, or what have you, and this is the voice that should speak the loudest. And if your CEO isn't listening to the voice of the customer, you need to find a new company, seriously. So how do we manage the highly paid people's opinions? Obviously they're there for a reason. So, they're the CEO, they're the ones driving the business, they're the ones that have the vision, in the most part. And so you have to sort of work on their turf, or at least speak their language. So when you're talking about, okay, we should pay down some tech debt, or we need to do some re-architecture or microservices or what have you, that you're saying, well, it's not just because I think it's cool, it's because I think there's some ROI here, or that it's going to drive the business drivers that we think are valuable for the company, and I'll get into that in a minute. That you leverage the customer voice, right? Customer voice speaks the loudest. So if you prioritize capturing that information, analyzing it, and bringing that to the table, then that should, don't listen to me, listen to our users, right? And commit to the process. So, there needs to be a process by which you decide on what features to do next. And as long as everyone is committed to that process, and that process, takes into account important information, as opposed to, oh, I just went to this conference and I just heard about, this new technology, and so now we're going to do it. Or, hey, there's this new market out there, we're going to go after it. It's so Etienne, loves to talk about flying with your CEO, right? So you listen to it. You capture that feature, that whatever that new thing is that you want to build. You add it to the list of items, and you prioritize it through the process that you guys have all committed to, right? And then capturing internal feedback. So this is something that I've dealt with a lot, where a lot of people just want to feel engaged and bought in the whole process of developing the product. They want to be listened to. So you want to have a forum for that. So you can brainstorm sessions, polls, et cetera, giving everyone in the company some way of voicing good ideas, But then again, all of these ideas go into not a backlog per se, but a list of roadmap items that need to be prioritized and reviewed. So how do we do it? So now we've got a list of things we could do. So how do we determine what to do next? And we like to use this type of model called pirate metrics. So I didn't make this up. There's a few different ways of doing this, ICE metrics or what have you, but basically saying we're going to rank roadmap items against business drivers, right? The things that are most important to a company. And they are acquisition, right? So first we have to acquire users. We have to activate those users, right? We get them in the door, we got to hook them. We got to retain them, right? So they use the product, they keep coming back. Daily use case, weekly use case, whatever. You want to monetize them, you know? I mean, maybe we're still in the world of the tech bubble where you don't actually need to make money, but if you're actually trying to create a business, you need some way of generating revenue. And then referral, right? So this is your viral loop here, right? So you want to acquire users, activate them, retain them, you know, have some kind of business model, but get them to refer their friends. That's how you drive growth. So, you know, this is the funnel, and it's pirate metrics, AARR. Does anyone know what that spells? Say it with me. R. Hope that wasn't too loud. What's great is when we actually do our prioritization, I have a little pirate hat and an eye patch that I'll bring with me, so it kind of lights things up a bit. Sorry? Referral. Yes. So you've got these business drivers. You know, maybe you can tweak them if your business is different, but you have the things that the company has agreed are important to develop features for. Right? Why are you developing a certain feature? Well, because I think it'll help us acquire new users. I think it'll help us drive, you know, premium users. It'll help us drive revenue. Whatever it is. These are the reasons why you're doing all the things that you're doing. And so then you need a set of metrics to determine whether or not that feature was successful, right? So we want to acquire users. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, it means we got people to visit the site. Wow, amazing. And they didn't bounce after 2 seconds, right? So you have some kind of set criteria for, you know, for being successful, for a feature being successful along that dimension. And you should identify these across all of them. You may have several, right? So, okay, you acquire a user. They visit your site. They sign up for your blog, or they sign up for your newsletter, or they create an account. You know, they come back, they repeat, right? They refer people, or they generate some kind of revenue, right? So you have these kind of metrics that you define success for, and that you can measure. Then you create your roadmap. So this is a spreadsheet that I use. I took out the data, but you know, this is a spreadsheet where I say these are all of the things that we say we're going to do. And they're very high level. So these aren't, you know, stories. You know, these are sort of initiatives, or they're just high level features that we've identified and we think are going to drive value. Okay. Now here's where the real, you know, argument comes in, is what number to give each of these features along these dimensions. Okay. And this is the only place that you get to argue about anything about this feature, right? It's like, okay, first we define the feature, we say what it is, you know, kind of try to explain it. Maybe you have a storyboard or something like that. But then you sit in a room in your roadmap meeting and you just decide how much of an impact is this feature going to have along these dimensions that we have all defined as being important for the company, right? So you give it a score, 1 to 5, whatever you want to do. Okay, cool. Once you've done that, it spits out a score. It's just the sum. If you want to add another layer to it, you can weight those dimensions as well, right? So, okay, for Q1, we're really focused on filling the top of the funnel. You know, hey, we've really, you know, once we get users in the door, they're hooked. We're not so worried about retention right now. We really need to just fill the top of the funnel. So let's prioritize the things that are going to drive, you know, acquisition. Okay, spits out a score, and then all it does, the spreadsheet just ranks it. And that tells you what you're going to do next. So you don't have to argue with anybody about what's going to go in the next release. All you argue is how much of an impact is this feature going to have on the business, which is a conversation that everybody at the C-level should agree is the thing that should be driving what you're going to be working on, right? Building the right product at the right time. And then the priority comes next. So then we execute. Okay, so now we know what we're going to do. We know when we're going to do it. Now we break it up into releases. We do our agile process or our mob process, or, you know, however you guys decide to execute. And then we close that feedback loop. Okay, so I'm going to skip over some of this. You know, I'm sure everyone's aware around how agile works, or whatever, you know, method you want to use. But what I want to highlight is a couple things. One is that you are setting expectations with your CEO, with your stakeholders, with whoever you are committing to, right? That you are transparent in that process, and that you have a feedback loop so that you're constantly, or as often as possible, validating that you're doing the right thing, right? That you're implementing what you thought you were going to implement. whether it's demos, having your product owner in your Scrum meetings, whatever it is that works for you. Iterative releases, pushing things every day with A/B testing, however you want to do it, just focus on getting that feedback loop and getting information from your users or from your stakeholders as quickly as possible. So setting expectations, again, it's all about, to me, transparency and focusing on feedback loop. So, this is the rule that I live by. You can have it good, fast, or cheap, and you can pick two, okay? If you have fast or cheap, you have low quality. That is something I will go to war for. No low quality. Why? Our users don't want that new feature if it's going to break everything else, right? They would rather have what they have today and work than to have something that's broken. So you basically can say, well, all right, we want to have it good, so it's either going to be fast or it's going to be slow. And these are the things that you can really engage on. So, well, all right, you want to have it good. Your CEO probably wants it fast. So how do you manage doing things quickly? I agree. I believe that it's basically around investing in technical debt, in test automation, all the good practices that we've been talking about today, right? So not being stuck in firefighting mode, not having to be focusing most of your time fixing bugs, et cetera, but just to get a good sustainable clip of, pushing out new features, but making sure that you're investing at least some portion of your time, 20 to 30%, just making your lives easier, right? Implementing tools that automate, going back and refactoring, improving your error handling, whatever it is. Just if you're going to take one thing away from execution, it's don't put features above everything else. You have to invest some time in making this thing sustainable. So I'll kind of skip over this. Again, execution, you guys all know burn downs, et cetera. But again, the key is demos, right? So static dynamic prototypes, at every step of the way, build something that you can put in front of your users or put in front of your stakeholders that says, do you think this will solve your problem? Does this solve your problem? Now actually use it. Is it solving your problem? Okay, do you like it? How about this new feature? Is this helping you continue to solve your problem, right? So that you're always getting something in front of your users or in front of your stakeholders as often as possible in order to make sure that you're building, again, the right thing. And focus on retrospective. So again, agile process, if there's one thing in any process that you do, mob, scrum, waterfall, et cetera, it's that you're always focusing on how can we do better? How can we change things going forward in order to make our lives a little bit easier, whether it's communication, whether it's training, whether it's tools, whether it's, again, we go back and paying down technical debt. If you're not doing the retrospective, and I just realized in a conversation I had today that I haven't done a retrospective in a while. And getting up, and I feel a little bit disingenuous about this, but you got to eat your own dog food. The retrospective, if you're not doing that, you're going to fail. It doesn't matter what type of methodology you use. You have to be focused on continuous improvement. So, and a little bit of recommended reading if anyone hasn't heard, Clean Code and Clean Coder. It's a couple books that me and everyone on my team, new person joins my team, they read these books, we talk about it, and we really enjoy it. So yeah, basically, what we're just talking about here is, commitment versus completed, right? So this is just tracking, tracking your velocity, tracking how you're progressing. I do a lot of tracking in my team, maybe even more than a lot, but I think it's kind of my background coming from a larger company. I like to have a lot of insight into how people are working. And really where I'm focusing a lot of this on is identifying waste. So I create a sprint, but I actually also require that my developers will create their own tasks in the sprint every time they get pulled on something operational, or anytime they get interrupted or pulled into some effort that we didn't plan for. And just understanding, again, if you want to make sure that you're working on the right things, well, you may even say, well, these are the things that I think are the right things, go do those things, but then they're off doing something else, and that's not being tracked, right? So yeah, that's the one thing, I call it waste, but it's essentially unplanned work, right? Just always keeping that focus on, are we working on the right things? And then last thing, closing the loop, again, listening to your data, right? So now you've executed on it, you've implemented, you've released that feature. Well, don't just let it go. how did you actually do? Did it actually have the impact? Was it the 5 that you thought it was on acquisition? Go back to those metrics, right? So collect those reports, look at it after the first day, look at it after the first week, 1 month, 3 months, right? And say, did that feature, did those users and those cohorts actually have that meaningful outcome that we expected? And then track it on your roadmap. So then the next time you do your roadmap planning, you actually say, well, okay, well, last time we met, we thought these things were going to be, have this kind of impact. We ran our reports, we've, calculated the impact, and actually, maybe it wasn't as good as we thought, or maybe it was way better than we thought. And then in that roadmap planning, you actually have a discussion around why were we wrong, right? So again, because then you may go back and say, actually, we're not really good at this. We thought we knew that this feature was going to be, a killer on acquisition, but actually it didn't work out. Well, why? And maybe we don't have the right, maybe we're not collecting the right data, or maybe we didn't do a good job this time of asking the right questions to our customers or whatever it is. But it's another retrospective, not only on the sprint, but on the entire product development process of, we're prioritizing these things. We think we know what impact these things are going to have. Well, make sure that you're right. And if you're not, if you were off one way or another, ask the question, right? And try to understand if there's something you can do to improve. That's it. Thank you very much.